Ciao, Trenders here. Today's topic, one of the biggest fails of the 21st century. Skype has been one of the most important apps ever since the internet was born. It gave everyone the power to talk to anyone in the world for free as long as they had an internet connection, and it was also one of the first apps that introduced the concept of video calls and video conferences to the masses. It got so popular to the point that it became a term recognized by many dictionaries, and it was also being used more often than the word video call. So how did they go from being this big of a deal to the announcement that on May the 5th it definitely shut down? Get ready, this video will almost feel like a soap opera, so you might want some popcorn. Alright, most companies are born with the purpose of trying to solve a problem that people have. So it's no surprise that Skype was founded in 2003 with the purpose of trying to reduce the costs of voice calls. They decided to take a different approach using what is called a peer-to-peer protocol. In short, traditional apps and games work by having a central server which listens to all clients, the people connected to the server, and refers back what everyone else is doing. A peer-to-peer protocol instead doesn't need a central server because the clients are directly sharing data with each other. The name Skype itself is an abbreviation of the words Skype peer-to-peer, and it would have been called Skyper if the domain was available at the time. Fun fact, the Skype logo was originally purple, and it took them 2 years to change it in 2005 to the first blue logo of the company. Skype immediately boomed in popularity since voice calls at the time were very expensive. There were two main types of phone plans in the early 2000s. There were contract plans with a monthly payment that granted a certain number of minutes and messages, and prepaid plans where users only paid for the minutes or the messages or the data that they actually used. Some of those plans also had a distinction between peak and off-peak hours, meaning that calls would cost more during the day and less during evenings or weekends. To give you an example for comparison with today's prices, in the US, a 450-minute plan would set you back $40. So it's no surprise that people started enjoying this service, since it allowed people to make phone calls completely for free, with the only requirement being an internet connection. And as Skype ballooned in popularity, it was eventually acquired by eBay for $2.6 billion. However, the e-commerce platform was not happy at all with this acquisition as time went on. In fact, eBay stated that the price they paid to acquire Skype was, and I quote, too much. eBay initially bought Skype because they wanted to integrate its services inside the shopping platform so that buyers could talk more easily to sellers, and at the same time sellers could have a more direct interaction with their customers. The problem is that eBay completely misunderstood its users. The buyers didn't want to get to know their seller. They didn't even need to video call them to get more information about the product they're selling, since emails are a thing. I mean, imagine if you're shopping at Amazon, you're looking at a phone that is really cool, it's got great specs, but wait, it doesn't have the color that you like. So let's just video call the president of that phone company and pretty please ask them to give you an aquamarine phone. People were okay with how eBay worked at the time. They didn't need video calls when emails and chats did the job just fine. And especially, people wanted to protect their anonymity online. So eBay started slowly regretting the decision of acquiring Skype, especially since the two companies worked in very different ways. eBay was a very conservative-minded company, whereas Skype, well, if you remember, Skype wanted to make phone calls basically free, which defeats the purpose of phone providers. And it's not hard to say that they're at the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Additionally, the fact that Skype was a constantly changing company, as proven by the several management teams that succeeded in the span of 4 years, didn't really sit well with eBay. Finally, the e-commerce platform started turning Skype from an app made for friends and families to communicate and talk to each other into a business platform. For example, they introduced the Skycasts, which is a service consisting of chat rooms with up to 100 participants where the host could choose who's able to talk. Despite all of this, eBay still thought of Skype as a commercial failure and eventually sold 65% of its stake to an investor group in 2009. In 2011, Microsoft acquired the whole Skype for the astonishing amount that is $8.5 billion, which was the most that Microsoft ever spent at the time in acquiring another company. They really went all in making sure that Microsoft fully integrated Skype as a service in their ecosystem. For example, they added it to Outlook, Xbox Live, and it even replaced their Messenger service. And do you remember the whole peer-to-peer thing that I talked about earlier? Well, Microsoft decided to just ditch all that and replace it with dedicated servers in their data centers. Apparently, it improved the reliability of the service since it doesn't run on people's potato PCs but on powerful servers. It helped to integrate the platform with mobile users, and especially it made the whole system much more secure. It is to note though that during this transition, people started noticing some issues like delayed messages or notifications. Despite all of this though, Skype was already becoming one of the most popular websites of all time, with hundreds of millions of people using it every month, both for personal use and for business. For example, in high school I used Skype a lot when we had group projects. I vividly remember one physics project I did with two of my classmates, and everything we did, from the video calls to the organization of the tasks, was done on Skype. And remember that it was during a time when, for example, WhatsApp video calls weren't a thing, and so for many people, Skype was the very first experience of being able to talk to another person who maybe was or lived very far away almost instantly, and being able to see them in real time. So it might have seemed to everyone that Skype was the number one, the titan to beat in that field. And they would be right. But things didn't stay that way forever. You see, Skype has been the default option for video calls for a very long time, as basically everybody was using it. At the same time, though, it wasn't the only one out there. For example, platforms like Zoom or Google Meet were already starting to be developed, with more intuitive and easy to use interfaces, and that could do as good of a job as Skype could. Or well, actually, even better. What I think happened is that Microsoft has started to rest on its laurels a bit too much. While other companies were starting to make their own tools to make sure that anybody who wanted to have a call could do basically anything they wanted to, Skype kept getting further and further stuck. For example, it didn't have as many real-time collaboration features like working on documents or sending files seamlessly. It didn't have as good of an integration with other services like Outlook or SharePoint, like Google did with its own services. And it also really sucked at large conferences and meetings. For instance, I remember this one school conference that we did some time ago on a platform that I'd never heard of, GoToMeeting. There were like 200 of us online at the same time, and it handled it with barely any issues at all. Compared to Skype's 100-person limit, which was only for business accounts and that went down to 50 on the consumer edition, it basically made it look like a children's toy in comparison. Speaking of which, there was also another incredible thing that occurred to me the first time I used that platform. All I needed to do to get into the call was to download a 10 MB file, launch the app, insert the room code, and I was done. I was into the call, no questions asked. And the same goes with Zoom, although at the time I never used Zoom because my school was on Google Meet, which works just as well. You just open a link, and assuming you're logged on Google, which, I mean, let's be honest, you most likely are, you're already into the call. End of the story. With Skype, the story goes way different. It can technically do instant calls without the need to sign up, but it wasn't what many people would call a butter-smooth experience. It was clunky, and more often than not, it had serious freezing problems. No, not that kind of freezing. I vividly remember while using it that to work on a school project for like 2 hours or so, my friend and I had to call each other like 5 or 6 times because the quality of the call was dropping so low that we could barely make the shapes of each other, and we couldn't understand each other at all, and it was driving me nuts. Okay, so in short, the Skype call experience, well, it was way worse. Especially since Microsoft got it, Skype began its transition from just a calling app to basically a social media app, with features like, yes, text messaging, but the feature to react to the messages as well, the mood or status, and even highlights. This one is particularly funny. Skype copied Snapchat into making a feature that allowed people to post photos for their contacts to view, just like how WhatsApp introduced statuses or Instagram introduced stories, because yes, for those who don't know it, Instagram copied that feature from Snapchat. However, Skype's attempt did not go so well because its users were so dissatisfied that Skype decided to pull out the feature just after 1 month of it being out. And this leads me to one of Skype's main issues. Skype did an incredible job in solving a real-world problem, making calls over internet happen, and especially making them virtually free. But they couldn't keep up. After seeing how they became the favorite option for people to make video calls with, it seemed as if they forgot that if they could make it, so could other people. In 2016, for example, WhatsApp rolled out the video calling feature to everyone, and since it's way faster to message and video call someone on the same platform, it meant that it was way better to video call someone on WhatsApp than on Skype. So bam, in one fell swoop, most of Skype's mobile users were just gone like that. And a similar thing happened with the computer universe, although it was a little bit different. Ever since platforms like Zoom or Meet started emerging, doing what Skype already did, but better, people slowly started gravitating towards those platforms. However, it's very hard for things to change all of a sudden, as people tend to stick with what they already have if it does the job well enough. The thing that brought this change to the extreme was COVID. Ever since the pandemic happened, people were stuck at home, but they still needed to work somehow, and for those who could, replacing physical meetings with digital ones was the only solution. So seeing how more efficient and powerful its competitors were to Skype, the transition towards other platforms accelerated exponentially. For example, even if I was more comfortable with using Skype for video calls, our school decided to use Google Meet, especially because it integrated well with Google Classroom, and also because video calls were incredibly better. At first I was very reluctant of the change, but all my concerns vanished in a week's time, seeing how better of an experience using Meet was. Let's take calls for example. On Meet, it was extremely easy. Everyone opened the same link from Google Classroom a couple of minutes before the lesson started, and we were automatically in the call. There was a chat that lasted until the call was over, which meant that any important message would not be flooded under a lot of "can you hear me? Is the connection good?" A thing that I encountered many times with Skype. The Google Suite just suited us better for what we needed to do, and there was no reason at all to use Skype if alternatives like this existed. So bam, all of the schools moved out from Skype. And finally, for those who needed to work, the ability to send a Zoom meeting to basically as many people as they needed to, with quick and easy to understand features, and then once they're done, move out with their work, was just revolutionary. But there is one last reason why Skype was doomed to fall for a very long time, and it's called Microsoft Teams. Teams was launched in 2017 as a direct competitor to Slack, another business communication platform. It's ironic considering that just a year before, Microsoft actually bidded $8 billion to acquire Slack, but Bill Gates stated that all resources should be spent towards Skype for Business. Funny how things turned out. Fun fact, Slack also decided to publish the full-page advertisement on the New York Times, welcoming Microsoft as a competitor. Teams kept progressing as a platform, bringing in new features and functionalities, and it was on par with many other competitors. In fact, Teams itself was one of the platforms that saw an exponential increase in users during the pandemic. It did everything that Skype should have been doing for a long while, provide an efficient and organized online work environment. So the most logical conclusion is that Skype was abandoned for a long time in favor of Teams. And since they saw how their resources were being put in the right place, Microsoft decided to move on from the 20-year-old platform. It's funny how there are still 40 million people who use Skype every month, although they will soon be prompted by this pop-up here to just prepare their transition to Teams. Well, that's the end of a legend. I mean, more of a decline than a straight up downfall, but still. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Ciao!